My parents, Mr. President, were born in the colonial India. And I was the first generation that grew up in an independent Pakistan. I want to make it clear that any attempt by the fascist, totalitarian, RSS-led Indian government to aggress against Pakistan will be met by a nation that will fight for its freedom to the end.
This hall heard the incessant rant of someone who had nothing to show for himself, who had no achievements to speak of, and no reasonable suggestion to offer to the world. Instead, we saw lies, misinformation, warmongering, and malice spread through this assembly.
Mr. President, the pandemic was an opportunity to bring humanity together. Unfortunately, it has instead fanned nationalism, increased global tensions, and given rise to racial and religious hatred and violence against vulnerable minorities in several places. These trends have also accentuated Islamophobia. Muslims continue to be targeted with impunity in many countries. We stress that willful provocations and incitement to hate and violence must be universally outlawed.
Mr. President, I am exercising India's right of reply to the diatribe that we heard this morning from the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Mr. President, this August forum witnessed today a new low on its 75th anniversary. The leader of Pakistan today called for those who incite hate and violence to be outlawed. But, as he went on, we were left wondering, was he referring to himself?
The one country in the world today where I'm sad to say the state sponsors Islamophobia, and that is India. The reason behind this is the RSS ideology that unfortunately rules India today. They believe that India is exclusively for Hindus and others are not equal citizens. The secularism of Gandhi and Nehru has been replaced by the dream of creating a Hindu Rashtra by subjugating, even cleansing India's 200 million Muslims and other minorities. In 1992, the RS destroyed the Babri Masjid. In 2002, some 2,000 Muslims were slaughtered in Gujarat, and this was under the watch of Chief Minister Modi. In 2007, over 50 Muslims were burnt alive by RSS arsonists aboard the Samjhota Express train. In Assam, around 2 million Muslims faced the prospects of being arbitrarily stripped of their nationality through the adoption of discriminatory laws. The Hindutva ideology is set to marginalize almost 300 million human beings, Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs. This is unprecedented in history, and this does not augur well for the future of India. As we all know, that marginalization of human beings leads to their radicalization.
This hall heard the incessant rant of someone who had nothing to show for himself, who had no achievements to speak of, and no reasonable suggestion to offer to the world. Instead, we saw lies, misinformation, warmongering, and malice spread through this assembly. The words used today at this great assembly by the leader of Pakistan demean the very essence of the United Nations. For a nation that is deeply buried in medievalism, it is understandable that the tenets of a modern civilized society, such as peace, dialogue, and diplomacy, are far-fetched. Allow me, Mr. President, to jog their minds a little about the stellar record of Pakistan. This is the country that has systematically cleansed its minorities, including Hindus, Christians, Sikhs, and others, through the abuse of its blasphemy laws and through forced religious conversions. For someone who professes to be a champion of Islam, this is also a country that has encouraged killing of fellow Muslims merely because they belong to a different sect or to a different region in Pakistan, and through sponsoring terrorist attacks against its neighbors.
Mr. President, for over 72 years, India has illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir against the wishes of the Kashmiri people and in blatant violation of the resolutions of the Security Council and indeed its own commitments to the people of Kashmir. On 5th August last year, India illegally and unilaterally sought to change the status of the occupied territories and deployed additional troops, bringing the total number to 900,000, to impose a military siege on 8 million Kashmiris. All Kashmiri political leaders were incarcerated. About 13,000 Kashmiri youth were abducted and thousands tortured. A complete curfew was imposed, accompanied by a total communications blackout. Indian occupation forces have used brute force, including pellet guns against peaceful protesters, imposed collective punishments, including the destruction of entire neighborhoods, and extrajudicially murdered hundreds of innocent young Kashmiris in fake encounters, refusing even to hand over their bodies for burial. The Kashmiri media and those daring to raise their voice are being systematically harassed and intimidated through the use of draconian laws. All of this is well documented in the reports of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, communications from the Special Rapporteurs of Human Rights Council, statements from human rights and civil society organizations.
The leader whom we heard today is the same person who referred to the terrorist Osama bin Laden as a martyr in his parliament in July. The same leader who spewed venom today admitted in 2019 in public in the US that his country still has about 30,000 to 40,000 terrorists who have been trained by Pakistan and have fought in Afghanistan and in the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. This is the country that brought genocide to South Asia 39 years back when it killed its own people. This is also the country that is shameless enough not to offer a sincere apology for the horrors it perpetrated even after so many years. This is the same country that provides pensions for dreaded and listed terrorists out of state funds. This is the same country that has the dubious distinction of hosting the largest number of terrorists proscribed by the United Nations.
The international community must investigate these grave violations and prosecute the Indian civil and military personnel involved in state terrorism and serious crimes against humanity being perpetrated, I'm sad to say, with complete impunity. The objective of this brutal campaign is to impose what the RSS-BJP regime has itself called the final solution for Jammu and Kashmir. To this end, the military siege is being followed by moves to change the demographic structure of the occupied territory. This is an attempt to obliterate the distinct Kashmiri identity in order to effect the outcome of a plebiscite envisaged in the UN Security Council resolutions. This action is in violation of the UN Charter, Council resolutions, and international law, particularly the 4th Geneva Convention. Changing demographic structure of occupied territory is a war crime.
What should rather be on the agenda of the United Nations is Pakistan's deep state and its unrelenting political and financial support to terrorist organizations and mercenaries which are a threat to global peace and security.
My parents, Mr. President, were born in the colonial India. And I was the first generation that grew up in an independent Pakistan. I want to make it clear that any attempt by the fascist, totalitarian, RSS-led Indian government to aggress against Pakistan will be met by a nation that will fight for its freedom to the end. Mr. President, there will be no durable peace and stability in South Asia until the Jammu and Kashmir dispute is resolved on the basis of international legitimacy. Kashmir has been rightly described as a nuclear flashpoint. The Security Council must prevent a disaster conflict and secure the implementation of its own resolutions, as it did in the case of East Timor. The Council has considered the situation in Jammu and Kashmir 3 times in the past year. It must take appropriate enforcement actions. It must also take steps to protect the Kashmiris from an impending genocide by India.
The only crowning glory that this country has to show to the world for the last 70 years is terrorism, ethnic cleansing, majoritarian fundamentalism, and clandestine nuclear trade. Mr. President, let me assert here loud and clear. The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is an integral and inalienable part of India. The rules and legislations brought in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir are strictly internal affairs of India. The only dispute left in Kashmir relates to that part of Kashmir that is still under illegal occupation of Pakistan. We call upon Pakistan to vacate all those areas that it is in illegal occupation of. The only way for Pakistan to become a normal country is to abjure its moral, financial, and material support to terrorism, turn its attention to the problems faced by its own population, including its minorities, and stop misusing UN platforms to further its nefarious agenda.